Wondarma bent low beneath his old wooden porch, pushing aside damp leaves and broken twigs. The beam of his flashlight swept across the soil and stopped cold. Nestled in the dark earth were dozens of pale, oval shapes. Not dozens, he realized as his eyes adjusted, but hundreds. Eggs. He leaned closer, knees pressing into the dirt, heart thudding against his chest. Chickens didn't lay here. Neither did the village lizards. Turtles? Impossible. He'd seen their nests before, and nothing looked like this. These were smooth, cream-colored, each one the size of a clenched fist, packed tightly together as if hidden deliberately. Curiosity overpowered fear. Juan reached out and brushed his fingertips against one shell. Warm. Alive. He froze, then pulled back quickly, as if burned. Inside, something shifted, something waiting. His throat tightened. What kind of creature laid hundreds of eggs beneath his home? And why here, under the floor where he slept every night? Juan's flashlight flickered, shadows crawling across the beams. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it, a fine crack racing down one shell. Another trembled, shuddering from within. Wondarma's face went pale as the first egg began to hatch. Wondarma was no stranger to the wild. At 70, the widowed farmer had spent his entire life in a small Indonesian village surrounded by rice fields, forests, and streams. He had seen snakes slither across irrigation ditches, lizards sun themselves on fence posts, and turtles lay clutches of eggs along muddy banks. But never in all his years had he seen anything like the hundreds of strange eggs packed beneath his own porch. Troubled, Juan brushed the dirt from his hands and went inside to fetch his phone. His nephew worked with the local wildlife department. If anyone could identify them, it would be him. Juan crouched again and snapped a few photos, careful to capture the size and strange smoothness of the shells. Moments later, he sent them off. The reply came quickly, but it wasn't comforting. "Uncle, these aren't in the database. I've never seen markings like this. Be careful." Juan's unease deepened. Over the next days, the eggs began to change. At first, they were a clean white. Then they turned cream, and soon dark veins appeared across their shells, like ink spreading through parchment. At night, Juan lay awake on his thin mattress, listening. From below the floorboards came faint scratching, quiet, rhythmic, unmistakable. He pressed his ear to the wood and shivered. Something alive was moving beneath him. Word spread quickly in the village. Neighbors gathered at his gate, whispering and shaking their heads. Some said it was a bad omen, others muttered about giant lizards, and the oldest among them whispered of spirits nesting in the soil. Juan tried to dismiss the talk, but he couldn't ignore the feeling creeping through him. His house seemed to breathe at night, as though the ground beneath it pulsed with hidden life. He found himself stepping lightly on the floorboards, as if afraid to disturb whatever stirred below. What were these eggs? Why had they appeared under his home? And most chilling of all, what was about to hatch from them? The next morning, 2 white trucks rumbled down the dirt road and stopped in front of Wondarma's house. Men in heavy boots and khaki uniforms stepped out, carrying clipboards, measuring poles, and equipment bags. 2 wore face shields and gloves, which immediately unsettled Juan. If this were just lizard eggs or something harmless, why the protective gear? They crouched beneath the porch while Juan stood nearby, wringing his hands. The officials spoke in low voices, careful not to alarm the crowd of villagers already gathering along the fence. One of them tapped his caliper against an egg and measured its width. Another scribbled quickly in a notebook, his face tightening. "Too large for geckos," one muttered. "Not turtle," said another, shaking his head. "Could be python," suggested the youngest. But the older man frowned. "Not pythons either. Shape is wrong, texture's wrong. Juan felt a chill slide down his spine. He leaned forward, desperate to hear more, but the men lowered their voices to whispers. The smell hit him then, a strange musky odor rising from the crawl space. It wasn't the scent of damp earth or rotting wood. It was sharper, heavier, as if the soil itself had soured. One official gagged slightly and pulled his collar over his nose. Another muttered 2 words Juan wished he hadn't heard. Not good. When they pushed deeper into the crawl space, the truth grew more disturbing. More clusters. Egg after egg tucked into corners, pushed against wooden beams, burrowed in the soil as if placed with purpose. It wasn't random. It looked coordinated, like a massive nursery. Outside, the villagers pressed closer, voices rising with unease. Some gasped, others shook their heads in disbelief. A few children tried to peek under the porch until their mothers yanked them back. Fear mixed with curiosity. The whole village seemed suspended between wanting to know and wishing they hadn't come at all. The officials regrouped at the edge of the yard. One argued they should move the eggs immediately. Another raised a hand sharply. Too late. Some are ready. Juan swallowed hard. He crouched again, shining his old flashlight into the dark. That was when he saw it, hairline cracks crawling across the shells. Tiny, jagged lines that hadn't been there before. One egg rocked slightly, then another. The sound was faint, like fingernails tapping glass. The officials froze, their eyes narrowing. Juan's throat went dry. He watched in horrified silence as one shell split open with a sharp snap. A glistening snout pushed through, slick and wet, followed by a flickering tongue. Another egg shook violently, another nose pressed against the shell until it split. Juan's flashlight trembled in his hand. His breath caught in his chest. What kind of hatchling was about to crawl into his home? The egg split with a sharp crack, and what slid free made Juan's knees weaken. A slender, pale snake uncoiled itself onto the dirt, its scales glistening wet under the beam of his flashlight. Its tongue flicked rapidly, tasting the air, and its bright eyes locked briefly on him before it slithered forward with alarming speed. Another shell burst open, then another. The soil writhed as hatchlings pushed free, each one moving with uncanny precision. They weren't sluggish, helpless creatures. They were fast, deliberate, alive. The officials froze for half a heartbeat. Then one of them snapped to life, shouting, "Everyone back!" His voice cut through the night like a whip. Chaos erupted. Children shrieked. Mothers clutched their arms around them and ran. Men stumbled backward, tripping over sandals and fallen branches. The crowd scattered, voices rising in panic. Juan didn't move. His face drained of color as recognition struck him like a blow. The hooded shape of the heads, the way the bodies lifted slightly as they slithered, it was unmistakable. Cobras. The snakes darted in every direction, some disappearing into the beams of his porch, others vanishing into cracks in the soil. The crawl space beneath his home seemed to come alive, a shifting carpet of pale, venomous bodies. "Evacuate now!" another official barked, motioning for the villagers to clear the area. "Full quarantine, nobody in, nobody out." Juan's mouth went dry. Quarantine? His home, his sanctuary for 70 years, was suddenly treated like a crime scene. He stumbled back into his yard, staring at the porch he had built with his own hands. How could it now belong to something else? The officials huddled together, arguing sharply. One insisted the snakes were cobras. Another shook his head. The markings are wrong. They're too pale. Maybe a rare viper? "They're venomous," the older man cut in firmly, his voice low and grim. That's all that matters. Juan stood frozen, heart hammering. He could barely hear the voices anymore, drowned by the sound of scales against wood and the memory of those bright, cold eyes. His porch, his safe place, was no longer his own. It was a battlefield. By the following morning, the eggs and several of the hatchlings were rushed to a regional wildlife laboratory. Hours dragged by as officials cordoned off Juan's property with bright tape and guards posted at the gate. Villagers stood at a distance, murmuring anxiously, waiting for answers. When the call finally came back, the lead officer's expression turned grave. He pulled Juan aside, speaking carefully but firmly. "They're king cobra nests." Juan staggered, his stomach twisting. King cobras, the largest venomous snakes in the world. His knees nearly gave out as the officer continued. "But not normal ones," he added. "That's why we didn't recognize them at first. These are leucistic variants, rare. Their pale coloring fooled even our experts." The revelation was staggering, but another detail left the officers shaken. Multiple female cobras had nested together beneath his porch, something almost unheard of in the wild. Instead of a single clutch, Juan's home had become a breeding ground, explaining the sheer number of eggs. An expert explained grimly, "They're venomous from the moment they hatch. Even the smallest can strike. You were living above more than 200 weapons." Juan felt his chest tighten. Every night he had slept soundly, unaware that beneath his wooden floorboards lay a hidden army of deadly serpents waiting to emerge. For 3 straight days, specialized snake handlers in heavy protective suits worked in shifts, carefully capturing each hatchling. They slid hooks under writhing bodies, eased them into sealed containers, and swept through every crack in the soil. By the end, they had pulled out more than 200 baby cobras. The villagers watched from behind barricades, a mixture of horror and awe etched on their faces. Some prayed aloud, clutching prayer beads. Others filmed with shaky hands, knowing few would ever believe such a scene without proof. Juan could only stand silently, pale and shaken, as his home was stripped of its dark secret. In the days that followed, Juan's home became unrecognizable. The wooden porch he had built with his own hands was torn down plank by plank. Teams in protective gear dug deep into the soil, treating it with chemicals to erase any lingering scent that might attract snakes again. When the work was finished, wildlife authorities issued a statement. Wondarma's Porch had concealed one of the largest king cobra breeding sites ever discovered in a residential area. The scale of it stunned even seasoned experts. Juan stood quietly at the edge of his yard as the last truck pulled away. His house looked hollow without the porch, its beams exposed like broken bones. Relief washed over him, but so did grief. This was his sanctuary for 70 years, and now it felt violated, dismantled piece by piece. The community was shaken too. Children were kept indoors, mothers whispered warnings, and neighbors gave Juan wary glances. Yet many also spoke his name with awe, the man who lived above a cobra nest and survived. Juan himself could not shake the thought. "At first I thought they were just strange eggs," he murmured. "If I had ignored them, I would have died in my sleep." He remembered his face going pale that first night, not from fear of snakes, but from realizing how close death had been all along, hiding beneath the floor he trusted most. Sometimes the greatest dangers aren't out in the wild. They're right under our feet, waiting. Would you have dared to wait and see what hatched, or run the moment you saw those eggs?